roles that the father should take in the last 30 years. And then as I was discussing in the other class, as women return to the workforce, as more women are predominant in the workforce, there are jobs that, women are better at team building exercises because they can communicate better. So men are being forced to learn to communicate and learn to interact with others in order to compete with those same women for those same jobs.
So here, there was one thing you said which I think we should clarify. You had said, and I know you didn't mean, reversal of gender roles. They're not reversing at all. What we are seeing is a gradual equalizing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, why do you keep saying men are forced to do things, but women aren't going out and doing things?
Well, don't go too far down that road, because well, no, I'm dead serious. It's a fascinating question. I mean, I think that you see a couple of things. One, you see sheer economic necessity. Now, and I've said this before, but you guys have already heard it. A woman who has a 6-month-old nowadays is more likely to be in the workforce than a woman from 1971 who had a 16-year-old. So women have fully taken on the role of the worker, which in Beaver Cleaver times...
The timing that we're living, I'm trying to understand why it's like that.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and that's exactly what I'm getting at. One, the economy has changed, and two, the culture has changed. And I think it's a reciprocal change. When you look back at Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystique, it came out in something like 1957. Coming out of civil rights, you had an equal rights movement for women, like this most recent wave of feminism arose out of that. So there was a push to improve women's well-being, which in and of itself is wonderful, it's great. But the flip side of that is, at the same time, if you look, wages have been fairly stagnant. So a 1970-something man with a high school education makes this much money. If you trace it out in continuous dollars, his well-being hasn't improved at all. When you actually plot out what happens to families, it looks like this, and then there's a growth like this. Here's what it looks like. So over time, family incomes creep up when we're looking at the man. In constant dollars, however, when you add in the women working, we're actually doing well. So over the last 30 to 40 years, the average family doing better is entirely because women have entered the workforce. Now, there's a cultural part, which is, we love women, women should do well, right? Who says the men are forced? Come on, right? That's okay, that's good. Sure, you bet, if that's what you like. At the same time, though, it's not only a story of women's equal rights. It may be not even mostly a story of women's rights, because underneath this is the fact that wages have stagnated for men. If you add on college degrees, they still haven't gotten that much better. And people are getting out of school and they're making $30,000, and they think, hey, this is great. When in 1950, in today's dollars, you got out of high school and you would have made $30,000, and your spouse would have stayed home and you could have raised a family. So there's an economic story and a cultural story, and the two go together. Because here's the other way of thinking about this. As long as you're doubling the number of people in the workforce, what do you expect to happen to wages?
They go down.
To go down, right? So on the one hand, yay, women are in the workforce. On the other hand, oops, there go my wages, right? So exactly which is the causal and which is the independent and which is the dependent variable is really, really hard to wrap your minds around. But if you can see this as a reciprocal thing that's been going on for 40 years, it starts to make a lot of sense. Now, I have no problem with any of this. And in fact, it's an awesome thing to talk about in sociology class. What really fascinated me about this that got me started was I expect people to say rural or small town places aren't as progressive as big urban places. Okay, duh, right? Of course the New York guys are sensitive, especially if they're making $150,000 a year, they can afford their feelings. but it never would have occurred to me to layer on race as part of the issues, if that makes sense. Curtis, were you putting your finger up?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out his point in terms of where he was trying to get before we started this conversation. We got sidetracked on movies I know nothing about. I've not seen either of those bunches of movies that y'all just got through discussing. I've been a little bit busy working, but in seeing so much of society, my job gives me that opportunity to see blacks, whites, men, women. I don't think, in this environment where you have so many people that's not from the South, as a transplant, I'm sure you can understand, there's a lot of different people in Warner Robins compared to true Southern people. A lot of the people who live in Warner Robins come off the base, they stay here. Half the people that I work with come from northern states. By seeing that, I don't think it's really fair to say that Warner Robins is a good place to pick out your subjects for Southern males to start with, because we're a lot more passive in Warner Robins than where I grew up, and it's only 65 miles south. There's just no other environment in there to mix in with it. Mm-hmm. At least not when I was down there anyway. But I'm not sure if he was trying to influence, to say that the country music was more gentle than the rap singers. Was that your point?
It's just that perception that as society is changing, you see it more okay that Caucasians express their emotions, but you're not seeing the same change in urban African American environments. Now, if you go to New York and you see the African Americans up there, because of the environment difference, they have to change accordingly. But in urban environments, you don't see African American males trying to be more effeminate. You actually see them trying to be more masculine.
Okay, and you're assuming that Southern country music singers are becoming more feminine?
Oh, no. So I don't believe. I just use country. I use the country music to argue the statement of Southern versus Northern, and perhaps I shouldn't have, because it seems to confuse a lot of people.
I didn't mean it as a Southern versus Northern thing. It was a city versus.
Okay.
Unless you said location didn't matter.
And this is,
I think it's more culture than a race thing. I don't think it's a black-white thing as much as it is culture, because if you come here in Warner Robins and look at the people that are here, you have a lot of young men, whites and blacks, that wear clothes that we wouldn't have wore where I come from.
That's one way of putting it.
And Chad's had to put up with my discretion over the years of some of the things that he just, I'm going to embarrass him real bad. His girlfriend stopped him into buying a pair of red pants. And
They were cool red pants.
I wouldn't have worn those pants. Well, to my high school, for nothing in the world, you'd have got your butt whooped by 10 guys before you got out the door. But so I think it's a cultural thing that's changing in terms of the rap thing, dealing with a lot of I guess rap music listeners in my line of work. You'd be surprised at how non-masculine they are when they're face to face with somebody that don't back down. And that goes for, anytime you can listen to any music you want to, and they can talk as nasty as they want to on the radio. Granted, the young culture in the neighborhoods now are starting to use more guns, and they're shooting at each other a lot more, even here in Warner Robins. But pulling a trigger does not make you masculine. You want to show me masculine, you get out there in the street and you do what you're going to do, but you don't need a gun for it. That just means you're too scared to do it with your hands. That doesn't make you masculine. So you can sing about shooting this guy and that guy all you want to, but that doesn't make you more masculine. That just makes you too scared to do it on your own.
But, so I want to make sure that I'm understanding, because I'm going to use all this data. What you are saying is that you do believe that it's not racial, that the blending of the genders doesn't matter whether you're white or you're black. Because as you were noting your son, you thought the pants were too effeminate, and you don't think he should have worn them, because when you were younger, men didn't wear those type of things, but now it is.
Yeah.
But y'all are also Caucasian, so you think it would be the same as an African American, that there are just as many.
I see a lot of things that young black guys wear that there's no way. In this school, watching them walk by, watching guys walk by, I see young guys, black and white, walk in with clothes that I'm like, there's no way, that wouldn't have happened where I come from. So it's a culture thing. It's not necessarily a race thing. It's and this culture here in Middle Georgia or in Warner Robins, where it's so mixed with so many different cultures intermingling, is a lot different than South Georgia. You go down to South Georgia, where most of the country music singers are coming from now. The 3-4 most popular singers in country music right now are very South Georgia, completely redneck, and their music's not gentle. It's not rap, I'm gonna cut you a key or anything, because our culture doesn't want to listen to that. They're not gonna buy that, that kind of stuff, which I can't really ever remember more than 2 or 3 country songs that I've ever heard that was really about. Johnny Cash, I think it was Johnny Cash, had the one about named his son Sue. That was a tough song, but that's one of the few songs that I've ever heard of in country music that discussed fighting and biting and getting down. That doesn't mean when they got drunk at the club on Saturday night they wasn't fighting and biting and getting down in the dirt.
Well, and I think that reputation was part of selling it to the right kind of people. I think, and that's just it. Like that whole conversation we were having, it's not even like what did that kid say who's not here today. The truth doesn't matter. What matters is perception, right? Yeah. And so you got to say the right things to get the right people to get you to buy stuff. Well, here's where I think this is kind of fascinating, and I don't know that we're going to. I mean, obviously we're not going to solve all those problems today, but if we look at this, because they didn't make me king. That's why not. I'd take the salary at least. If we're thinking about this in terms of race, look at the correlation problems we're going to run into. So if we say the U.S. has race issues, there are black people and white people, and there are a few others too, but we don't really worry about that unless we live in California, then they start fights. But seriously, we got black people, we got white people, and somehow or other things aren't really the same. They're not really fair. How do we sort this out? So if we're looking at this from a gender perspective, okay, when we start to say location, well, at the beginning of the class, and only some of you all were here to hear me say it, where I grew up, there was no such thing as country blacks. Because I grew up in Nebraska, and if you're from Nebraska, or you're from Chicago, or you're from Minnesota, or you're from Montana, the black folks in your area are there because their folks decided to come and get a factory job, right? And if they came to get a factory job, they're living where the factories were, which is down in the city. There's a reason we have inner city ghettos in those northern cities, and it's because of that history. So there weren't folks out in the country, right? So if you're north or south, could what you see as a north-south difference end up being an urban-rural difference? Or could end up being a race difference because there's a certain amount of overlapping there? And that's what makes this, that's what would make this very hard to really ferret out all of the issues that we're going to talk about here. Now, the final thing that Billy had said was, well, the first thing that Billy had said is, what about gender? We haven't talked about it, but most social critics, most sociologists are going to accept that when it comes to families, black women are the ones who are, for the most part, running things. That's the way it is nowadays. It may not have been always in that way, And I know from what, I mean, it's in the literature. That's what I know from. But there have been several books with different field research sites talking about how this deindustrialization has really hurt black families. And there's several layers to this, but they'll talk about, to borrow from one of them, the old heads. If you were to have gone to a black neighborhood in Chicago in 1950, the men in that neighborhood would have had jobs. The families in that neighborhood would have been pretty traditional, and they're going to seem extremely rigid along gender lines to us nowadays. Dad made the decisions, Dad called the shots, Dad did the disciplining, and when people in the neighborhood started screwing around, the dads had no problem stepping out in the neighborhood and keeping everybody else in control, right? That's what these guys are going to say. Then along comes deindustrialization, then along comes a lot of things. That's not what city, northern black families look like nowadays, right? So that nowadays, you will find people, conservative and liberal alike, but the spin they put on it is different, who will say, and I've heard this just since being here, the problem with black men these days is they don't have role models. They've been feminized by their women, you know. And so the conservatives will say, the girls aren't growing up good guys. I don't know what the guys do. The liberals say, oh, you know, those poor inner city people.